My key wouldn't turn. I was standing on the front porch of my grandfather's house, wearing the black suit I had just worn to his funeral. I jiggled the key again, my exhausted, grief-fogged brain thinking I was just turning it the wrong way. Then, I looked down and saw the fresh brass shavings and a light dusting of sawdust sprinkled across the welcome mat. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. I turned around slowly, looking out at the front lawn. There, scattered under the massive oak tree like discarded garbage, were 6 heavy-duty black trash bags. One of them had torn open, spilling my favorite college hoodie and a stack of my jeans into the damp grass. My things. My life. Before I could even process the violation, the heavy wooden front door swung open. Standing in the doorway, blocking the entrance to the house I had lived in for the last 5 years, was my estranged Aunt Brenda. She was wearing a casual tracksuit and a smug, victorious grin. "You don't live here anymore, OP," Brenda said, leaning against the doorframe. "Get off my property." I stared at her, genuinely thinking I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. Brenda hadn't visited my grandfather in 6 years. She hadn't called when he was diagnosed with dementia. She hadn't lifted a finger while I moved in, quit my full-time job, and spent 5 grueling years changing his adult diapers, managing his medications, and holding his hand until he took his final breath 2 days ago. She had, however, managed to show up to the funeral reception an hour ago just to eat the catered sandwiches. And then, apparently, she slipped out early to ambush me. "Brenda, what the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking as I pointed to the new, shiny deadbolt. "Did you drill the locks?" "I secured the premises," she corrected me, crossing her arms. "I called a locksmith an hour ago. I had to make sure you didn't come back and steal any of the family heirlooms or the good silver. You've had free rent in my father's house for 5 years, playing nursemaid. The free ride is over." "Your father's house?" I echoed, stepping closer to the door. "Brenda, I live here. My entire life is in that house. My computer, my documents, my furniture. You can't just bag up my clothes and lock me out." "I just did," she smirked. "I'm the eldest child. That makes me the executor and the rightful heir. I've already called a real estate agent. We are listing this place on Monday, and I am not having some squatter living in the basement ruining my staging process." "I am not a squatter," I yelled, my grief instantly converting into pure, white-hot fury. "I was his full-time caregiver. And you aren't the heir, Brenda. You haven't spoken to him in half a decade because he wouldn't co-sign your 3rd mortgage." "How dare you?" she shrieked, her smug facade dropping for a second. "I am his daughter. The law defaults to the next of kin. You are just a grandson. Now take your garbage bags and leave, before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." "Call them," I challenged, planting my feet firmly on the porch. "Call the cops right now, Brenda, because what you just did is an illegal eviction, and you are about to find out exactly how wrong you are about who owns this property." She laughed a harsh, grating laugh. "You're bluffing. You have no money for a lawyer, OP. You gave up your career to wipe a dying man's ass. Now get off my porch." She slammed the door in my face. The new deadbolt slid into place with a heavy thud. I walked down the steps to the lawn, staring at my clothes spilling out of the trash bags. She thought she was the default heir. She thought she could just bulldoze her way into a $500,000 property because of blood. She didn't know about the meeting Grandpa and I had with his estate lawyer 3 years ago. I didn't wait for Brenda to make good on her threat. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and reported a breaking and entering and an illegal lockout in progress. Then, I sat down on the curb next to the torn trash bag of my clothes and waited. 15 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up to the curb, its lights flashing silently. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes darting from me sitting in my wrinkled funeral suit to the massive pile of black plastic bags littering the manicured lawn. "Evening, sir," the older officer said, resting a hand on his utility belt. "We got a call about a disturbance." "That was me," I said, standing up. "My grandfather passed away 2 days ago. We just buried him this afternoon. I came home to find the locks drilled and my belongings thrown onto the grass. The woman inside broke in." Before the officer could even pull out his notepad, the heavy front door flew open. Brenda burst onto the porch, clutching a tissue and putting on a masterful, Oscar-worthy performance of a grieving, terrified woman. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she cried, her voice trembling perfectly. "My father was just put in the ground 3 hours ago, and now my estranged nephew is out here harassing me. He's trying to break in and steal my father's valuables." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her sociopathic ability to lie on command. "I live here, Brenda. I've lived here for 5 years taking care of him while you didn't even call on his birthday." The younger officer stepped between us, holding his hands up. "Okay, let's calm down. Sir, do you have proof of residency?" I pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. "My ID has this address. My bank statements go to this address. I am a legal resident." The younger officer looked at the ID and nodded. His address matches the house. You can't just change the locks and throw his property outside. That's an illegal eviction." Brenda didn't flinch. She dabbed her dry eyes with the tissue and squared her shoulders. "He was a guest of my father," she stated, her voice turning sharp and authoritative. "But my father is deceased as of 48 hours ago. I am his only living child. I am his direct next of kin. Under state law, the property defaults to me. I am the rightful owner, and I want this squatter removed from my property before he loots the place." The two officers exchanged a loaded, uncomfortable look. Police absolutely hate dealing with fresh inheritance disputes. It's a legal minefield. And usually, without a will present, the law does favor the direct offspring over a grandchild. The older officer sighed heavily and handed my ID back. "Look, son," the older cop said gently, his tone shifting. "I'm sorry for your loss. But she's the daughter. If there's no paperwork proving otherwise, she is the presumed executor and next of kin. We can't force her to let you into a house she now technically owns. If you force your way in, I'll have to arrest you for breaking and entering." "He's a squatter," Brenda yelled from the porch, a sickeningly triumphant smile creeping onto her face. "Make him take his garbage and get off my lawn." "Sir," the younger officer said, pointing toward the street, "you need to gather your bags and leave. You can take this up in probate court on Monday. But right now, you are trespassing." My chest tightened. Brenda looked like she had just won the lottery. She thought she had outsmarted me. She thought she had the police in her pocket. "Officers," I said, my voice eerily calm as I turned toward my parked car. "Please don't leave just yet. I need to get a folder out of my trunk." I popped the trunk of my sedan and pulled out a heavy, fireproof document bag. I had retrieved it from my grandfather's safe deposit box earlier that week, knowing exactly what kind of vultures would start circling once he passed. I walked back over to the police officers and pulled out a thick stack of pristine, notarized papers. The official last will and testament, and the updated property deed. "My grandfather and I met with his estate attorney 3 years ago," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lawn so the woman on the porch could hear every word. I handed the folder to the older officer. "Page 4. The officer adjusted his glasses and read the highlighted paragraph aloud. "Due to years of estrangement and abandonment, I intentionally leave absolutely nothing to my daughter, Brenda. I hereby name my grandson, OP, as the executor of my estate and the sole beneficiary of all assets, including the primary residence." Brenda's smug, triumphant smile instantly dissolved into a look of sheer panic. "That's a forgery," she shrieked, taking a step down the porch stairs. "He wouldn't do that. I'm his blood. I'm the default heir." "Stay right there," the younger officer commanded, holding up a hand. The older officer flipped to the next document in the folder. "And here is a transfer on death deed, filed and stamped by the county clerk 2 years ago. The title of this property legally transferred to this young man the exact second your father passed away." The officer closed the folder and handed it back to me with a respectful nod. Then, he turned to face Brenda. The sympathetic, gentle demeanor he had shown the grieving daughter completely vanished, replaced by a cold, professional glare. The older officer barked. "You have exactly 5 minutes to step off this property, or you are going to jail." Brenda froze. "Jail? For what?" "This is a family dispute." "No, it isn't," the officer corrected sharply. "You do not own this house. You do not live here. You hired a locksmith to drill out the deadbolts of a home you have zero legal claim to, and you illegally removed the rightful homeowner's property onto the lawn. That is breaking and entering, burglary, and destruction of private property." Brenda's face turned a violent shade of purple. "I am his daughter. This is my house." She spun around and lunged for the front door, desperately trying to get back inside so she could lock the new deadbolt and barricade herself in. "Oh, no you don't," the younger officer shouted, sprinting up the porch steps. He grabbed her by the shoulder just as her hand hit the doorknob. Brenda absolutely lost her mind. She shrieked, wildly swinging her elbow backward and striking the officer in the chest. "Get your hands off me. Get off my property." That was the worst mistake she could have possibly made. Within 3 seconds, both officers had her pinned against the siding of my grandfather's house. The sharp, metallic click-clack of handcuffs echoed across the quiet suburban street. "Brenda, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, vandalism, and assaulting a police officer," the older cop read, marching her down the steps as she kicked and screamed obscenities that made the neighbors open their blinds. The aftermath. I stood on the lawn, watching the cruiser's red and blue lights flash as they shoved my estranged aunt into the backseat. Once they drove away, I picked up the ripped trash bags and carried my clothes back inside. The house smelled exactly like my grandfather, Old Spice and black coffee. I called an emergency locksmith to come fix the door Brenda had ruined. As I sat at the kitchen table waiting, I looked at the notarized will. My grandfather knew exactly who his daughter was. He knew she would try to swoop in and take everything I had sacrificed 5 years to protect. He made sure she left in handcuffs. And he made sure I finally had a home.